kids in cages and other scenes from Trump's zero-tolerance border. Saturday afternoon I was at a baby birthday party in Los Angeles with my wife and 2.5-year-old son. In the parking lot of a preschool, we climbed on the back of one of those tiny trains that drives in circles until it makes you sick, and your kid ecstatic. After the first ride I hopped off, and they went on another loop. I had to make some phone calls. Not long before we got to the party, I'd heard from an official at the Department of Homeland Security urging me to get to McAllen, Texas, as soon as I could. But tomorrow is Father's Day, I said. This is the epicenter, the official told me. The epicenter, that is, of separations of migrant children from their families, ripped apart as a direct result of the Trump administration's zero-tolerance immigration policy. As White House Chief of Staff John Kelly acknowledged to NPR last month, the policy was intended as a tough deterrent. The idea was to scare off migrant families thinking of crossing the southwest border between ports of entry, by threatening to take their children away. The DHS official offered me a tour of the facility at the center of the sector where more children, more than 1,100 in all, had been separated from their parents than at any other place in America since early April. You should get on a plane. The official wanted us to get there before Democratic politicians toured the facility, the Border Patrol's McAllen Processing Center, later that Sunday afternoon. I assume the goal was to preempt, and thereby blunt, the inevitable barrage of criticism those Democrats would unleash after they saw what President Trump's policy looked like on the ground. I called my bosses at NBC, and we decided I would go. I ate dinner with my family, then took a flight at 1 a.m. on Sunday to Dallas with producer Aaron Heikala. We slept on the floor of the Dallas airport for a few hours, then boarded a 9 a.m. flight to McAllen. 2 days earlier, I had come home exhausted after a trip to Brownsville, Texas. There, I reported from inside another facility at the center of this controversy. A 250,000 square foot former Walmart that had been converted to house more than 1,400 young unaccompanied migrant boys between the ages of 10 and 17. I was part of the first small group of journalists granted access without cameras to any facility, and any of the kids who had been taken from their parents under Trump's policy. Recently arrived migrant families speak with volunteers at the Catholic Charities Humanitarian Respite Center in McAllen, June 21, 2018. That shelter, run by the nonprofit Southwest Key under a contract with the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, and held to the same standards as other child care facilities, was the same facility where Senator Jeff Merkley was turned away, in a confrontation that was streamed live on the senator's Facebook page. I have been inside several jails and a federal prison. The kids in Brownsville, a surging number of them rendered unaccompanied by being separated from their parents, as my colleague Chris Hayes put it, weren't in cells, but they were essentially incarcerated. Yes, they were allowed to play video games, watch movies like Mona, and take classes in English, but they were locked inside for 22 hours a day during the week. And, most important, they were being forcibly kept apart from their parents. I said as much in a live broadcast on MSNBC immediately after my tour, while I was still processing what I had seen. But that facility was luxurious compared to what I and another hand-picked group of journalists were about to see. The McAllen Border Patrol facility is the first place kids and their families caught crossing the border illegally in the area are brought by Border Patrol. It's where they are booked. It's a massive facility, 77,000 square feet, with 55,000 dedicated specifically to families and unaccompanied kids. The idea is to get them out of there within 72 hours, either to ICE family detention or to an HHS shelter like the one I saw in Brownsville. But since the zero-tolerance policy was announced, some of those parents were being sent to federal courtrooms, and their kids were being labeled unaccompanied, and placed in the custody of HHS as a result. In addition to the minors who had entered the U.S. alone illegally for years, there was a new group of tenants at the Border Patrol Center, so-called tender-age children, including babies, who were taken away from their parents as they were carted off and charged with the federal misdemeanor of entering the United States illegally. Many of those parents had arrived seeking asylum from violence in a Central American country. The whole tour was shocking, and by now you've likely seen the handout images from the government, the mylar blankets, the mattresses on the concrete floors, and the cages. That's what they were, cages. But there's something you didn't see. It wasn't in the handout photos or the video of us getting led around. It was something I'll never forget. Border Patrol later told me it was a play area. Really? It was a cage filled with what I remember being at least a dozen young kids, some of whom had been separated from their parents. Some were sitting on the floor and some were standing, and they were being supervised by a contracted guard at the center of the cage in a watchtower.